So I titled this living a whole life in the embrace of death. And I've been thinking about doing this kind of talk, or maybe doing a circle about death. Death comes up, it gets mentioned here, but I don't know how many of us sit around and talk about death, about our death. Of course, there are people here, with all due respect, I want to say this at the beginning, who may be living with a chronic, difficult illness. There may be people here who have had such illnesses and face death. And so I just want to say that anything I say here is with that in mind and all due respect. So I don't want it to sound frivolous or disrespectful of what people may be in this moment experiencing in this room that we don't know. So with that out front, there's obviously someone here who works with death, and many of you may do that in your life or have done it that we don't even know about. So just keeping that respect and regard in mind as we talk about this in a not always totally serious manner. So, and I want this talk, how I started out thinking about it was as, I'm not going to tell you that I know how you should die or that there's some way you should die. Although in Buddhism, there are thoughts about that, not so much as should, but as a possibility. So I really want you to think about this as an exploration, and maybe exploration of dying, our own death. Death is always, or generally speaking, an exploration, because nobody knows, right? This is the great mystery that whatever we believe, whatever various teachings teach us about this, the bottom line is we don't know. And this makes us very uncomfortable in our relative particular existence as a self. Self does not like to know. There's going to be no bridge over that river, or if there is not a bridge, we want to know. But we get to that river, and there may not be a bridge. There may not be. We don't know the moment. There's no way, even with all kinds of predictions and serious illness, people all the time don't follow those. So we don't know. This is the big absolute. It's maybe the only thing that we do know for sure is that we don't know. We may think so. We may have premonitions. We may have information. But ultimately it comes back. There are all kinds of stories of people dying and it being very shocking to us because we thought we would certainly die first. So certain people in my life have very strict instructions that they are not to die before me. No. Anyway, so think of it as exploration. And we have so cut off death from our daily experience in this society, although we're making some progress. And I don't know, so what I want to do a little bit this morning is just really confront this question. Do you know? Do we know? Can we really know we're going to die? Is this real for you? And I mean real in this self that we've now developed and become quite solid. This provisional self that we don't know is provisional. Do we know it's provisional? Joe uses that. So do we know we're provisional? We can't live this life daily. It's really difficult to live this life daily and know we're provisional, because we have to pay the bill, or they'll take away our house, the taxes. We have to eat, or we'll starve to death. We have to live this life that we're in, this body. And that's very challenging to do and say, this is a temporary house. Because when we as a species, we as a physical being, We are geared to live. This organism is miraculous, and everything happens to say, live, survive. That's how come we've overpopulated the planet, right? We're really good at it. So that energy, that determination, that will is obviously stronger in some people than others. Some of us here have known people that even when there's nothing left, they're still alive. And so that will, that strong life force is aimed at one thing, staying alive. So how do we balance that? And that's an ongoing question, because then we develop this identity, we develop self along the way from this physical being. And that self agrees with the life force. It's like, yeah, I don't want to die. I don't want anybody I love to die. I don't want anyone to die. Does anyone want people to die? No, no. But it's an impossibility we have going here, or it feels that. It can seem that. So that's the exploration. And I believe it needs to be fresh and ongoing, not something we set at some point, say, oh, you know. And of course, this is very, very much our practice. So there is some feeling that Buddhism operates to deal with death, this being the big mystery. So it's very important. It's very central to practice. And practice is, of course, I think, and maybe most of you here think, that in fact, practice is how we embrace our own death and death around us. So death in the very big sense, and that's intimately a part of practice. So, you know, that's how come I think many of, not the only how come, but a big part of the how come is this mystery. And practice here is our path and our way. But in the meantime, here we are. So, and you know, there are all sorts of ironies in this. Every time a woman gives birth, she creates a death. These are intimately, there's not separation here. This is intimately related. So I just want to ask you, I'm going to give you a few questions, and some of them are redundant for some of you. And just to not answer these, we're not going to discuss them or anything, but just to keep them in mind and maybe refresh this. So, have you come close to death yourself? These are just to keep to yourself. We're not going to have big sharing around it, but have you come close to death? Maybe it was in childhood. I really came very close to drowning when I was 10 years old. So certain experiences, even if we haven't, been at that edge in the hospital, have people close to you? If you're younger, this may not have happened. It doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't happened. People very close to you died. Have you experienced extreme, painful loss? And many people have. A child may lose its parents. There's all sorts of ways to lose people. And if we live long enough, we may lose everyone. Not such a happy thought. And have you seen someone die? Have you been with a dying person? Have you sat with someone whose life force is gone? Have you sat with them for a while? Have you ever watched someone and hallucinated that they breathed again, even though you've seen the last breath? Have you experienced these things? Because this culture keeps us from it. It's been a long time now of people, when I was young, there was no question that people didn't get embalmed and buried in caskets. That whole experience of the funeral home, had developed somehow. That was not my childhood. which was in rural Oklahoma, my early childhood. My grandmother once took me with her when I was visiting to a funeral, and there were two young girls, probably older than me, maybe 7, 8, dressed in white. It was very, very hot. So the funeral was happening at the house that day. And I just was so, I was probably 5 or 6. So I was preoccupied. Well, it's vivid memory, like technical, of these girls. And I was fascinated or intrigued or something compelled. I didn't have that language then, that their mother had died. My mother was always the most important person in my life. I don't remember being scared. It was more of this phenomenal thing could happen. My mother was really mad at my grandmother for taking me. I always liked it when my grandmother did these kind of things that my mother didn't think I should be exposed to. But anyway, that was my first memory, except of course with animals, because I lived on a farm. Things died and things were killed and butchered. So I suppose I grew up with this just gradual integrating this. And so that's another question. How do you remember when you first encountered death as a child? Do you remember when that first became something you understood? And how did you understand it? And was it frightening to you? And are you afraid now? Or do we live in fear of death, our personal death? Maybe, maybe not. One time, who was Ajo then, it was beginning early in the term. It was beginning, I think, of term. Everyone was going in, and I think he was doing this with everyone. It's a long time ago. And he was asking, all right, what do you want? And I said, I think to his surprise, I don't want to be afraid to die. This is a long time ago. So I remember it seemed to me he looked a little startled. He was probably expecting me to say, I want to practice more diligently or something. So that's a while back. And I didn't know if I was going to be afraid or not, since fear has not been so dominant in my life. I've had lots of frightening things happen to me. Well, I've had some fairly dangerous. But fear has not, when things were being dealt out, your traits and your stuff was being dealt out to you. Somehow I didn't get a big component of that one, which is a good thing. So, and then do you have some notion of how you'll die? Do you have some notion of how old you'll be? When people are young and romantic, they often think, oh, one of my sons kept carrying, oh, I don't think I'll live to be 40. I said, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. And a very, some people have this romantic ideal, but I don't know how come. But it often is not the case. So moving on with this and talking a little bit about what it is for us here in terms of practice. So Ajo often uses the phrase going beyond. So one way of talking and thinking about death is life and death, not just death, birth and death. That is going beyond. So what are we saying we're going beyond? We think about that. And we've had this, we've been talked to a lot about this. So if we think that when we say birth and death, we create a duality, we maybe even think of it as opposition. So this is what we're going beyond. Birth and death are not separate. This is the birth and death. So it's hard to not make them separate because one brings us into form and presumably that form is going to disintegrate. I have a dry throat problem. I hope to not cough. So let's think a little, let's wonder a little, what is going beyond? And if we're going beyond birth and death, then partly how we're going beyond is this duality. We're going beyond this separation. We're going beyond our delusion, our illusion, that we are a permanent being, that we are a separate being from all else. So death is really the great teacher of this. So going beyond, at least this is how I'm seeing it right now. Much more could be said about this and has been said by our teacher. But I think in relation to birth and death, then it takes on a particular quality. So if we can notice every time we think of this as opposition rather than together, joined. Genki said something last Sunday, I think, that expressed all this really well. I'm not going to ask you to remember it. Don't worry. So, in fact, do you remember last Sunday? All of a sudden, something got started about death, and I thought, oh, this is going to happen now. But anyway, it didn't go too far. And so back to this. So then the other way of thinking about going on or going beyond in terms of birth and death is to think of continuum, no stopping. Energy doesn't really stop. We can't stop energy. The enlivenment, thus this enlivenment in us. So if that doesn't stop, how does it go? It goes beyond this physical body. And going beyond can be seen also as liberation. And I just remembered that I was going to read 2 poems before we started, and I didn't read them. So that's just part of being discombobulated. So hopefully I'll remember them at the end. Sorry for interrupting. This is my discombobulated mind. So, but going beyond, when we think of it as liberation, think of it as we go beyond our greed, our hate, our delusion. We go beyond, isn't that how come we practice? Isn't that part of what we're doing every day, is making that, holding this intention of going beyond. And death is liberation from this in a certain way. I'm not saying we seek it for that reason, but I'm saying quite clearly that it is. And then we come to this whole issue of what happens at death, of rebirth, not rebirth, belief, faith. When Ajo, he was Ajo then 20 years ago over at Potter Street, I mean, I think it was a really early talk. Said he brought up the difference between faith and belief. And so I was in this attitude of, all right, this young guy here, we'll see what he can do. I mean, I honestly had some of that attitude. So I thought, really, he's bringing, but it's not. It's a profound, ongoing question. And so when we speak of faith, we come back to the refuges that we just took this morning. Because belief, in my opinion, we won't get off on that, is a set of beliefs that say how things are going to be. Is it getting too warm? Would anyone like air conditioning? Everyone's okay. So, whereas faith is faith in what we can't see. We don't know. We don't have language. We don't say faith in. We take refuge, which is an act of faith. It's an expression of faith to say, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Because we don't have anything written. Oh, if you take faith and have faith and take these, then you don't know. It's not giving you anything you know. So we take it on faith. You know that expression? To take something on faith. So that's some of what we come to when we're thinking about death and this practice. And then we have the question of the reason I bring up belief is because there are many, many religious practices and traditions that say what's going to happen after death. And while we don't say that in any finite terms, there is built into Buddhism, and it's very difficult to square it up, taking the Bodhisattva vow, which you do when you do Jukai. Everybody focuses on the precepts, but remember, the big deal here is you've taken the Bodhisattva vow, and that's a lifetime vow. You can drop it, you can not practice it, but you take it, you agree to it. And that implies rebirth. Because if we're saying in the Bodhisattva vow that I will not seek my own liberation until all sentient beings have been enlightened, then what am I saying? Aren't I saying, I'll forego my own liberation, I'll forego my own moving beyond completely, I'll forego nirvana? I don't want to talk about nirvana, I don't actually totally understand it. But anyway, so does that not imply? So I suggest we think hard about this Bodhisattva vow. You know, the precepts, yeah, okay. Serious battle, for sure. But this vow, and so we don't know what rebirth is. I've asked this to several Buddhists from different practices, different paths. The Theravadan folks, of course, the Tibetan is more familiar to me. They lay it out. There's no messing around with rebirth. If or not, yes, no. It's like, hey, this is how it goes. So get ready for the barbers, right? But we don't do that. But I do want you to come back. And so it's very difficult for me to say, what is rebirth? But intuitively, a long, long time. I mean, I was a really hard-headed, rational atheist when I was young. And I always indulged my mother when she wanted to talk about, she'd been astral traveling or something. And I think if anybody ever did, she probably did. So I was always very supportive and enjoyed these conversations, but it wasn't my thing. So this came to me rather late. And it came more experientially than logically. But I always remember Robert Thurman at a talk at the university, and he's a very important Tibetan Buddhist writer and teacher, saying, the scientists say we don't know, but they don't know either. They've never scientifically demonstrated that nothing happens, that it's just a matter of matter. So how do they, they don't know either. So I thought it was great, and he's very funny if you ever get a chance to hear him talk. So this going beyond permeates our embrace of death. And this faith, taking refuge, being in faith that we can be carried to some extent. We don't in our little self have to do it, right? We're not separate. We're all moving together. This Sangha moves together. All our energy moves together. This is our intimacy even when we don't know anything about each other. I knew people here for years. I never knew their last name. So I want to talk a little bit about doing death, because even with all the going beyond, there's still a physical body. There's still taking care of one another in death. We all are a physical body, and so that's all going to happen. And as I mentioned before, we over time developed this big separation. A woman named Kubler-Ross, I think people probably know about her, who really kicked off the hospice movement, even encouraged having a hospice house where people could go And we have one in Eugene. I forgot the name of it. It's um, it's a very fine place. It's lovely, well done, well designed. And so, of course, so let's talk a little about what we do here and how all that goes, because it's intimately related in our practice to how we actually then do it. So the best place to die is here. I have that from Hojas. So if you can get here, if somebody can drag you into the courtyard out there, it's the best place. Now, if you can't, then home. I have always had this vision. I have a big apple tree in my backyard, very old. There's the other thing of sitting or standing is better than being on your back. So if you can possibly stand up. Now, I don't know where that comes from, but while sitting or standing, right? That's so I always thought if I could just stagger out there, or somebody could drag me, and I could put my arms around that tree. And 2 of my dogs are buried under that tree. And but who knows? I don't know. Back to we don't know. I may not be in that house. Who knows where I'll be? I could be running. The last time I ever run a river with my son, maybe I'll die on the road. That wouldn't be bad. Although it'd be hard on him. So that's anyway. So home if possible, hospital it might happen, and obviously things can happen there we have chaplains, and so one of the things we talk about in this practice is 3 days. So ideally we are kept, we die, life has left our body, the last breath, we wait 3 days. It takes that long for this life force to leave. Now that may not be possible, but it's possible to get all kinds of instructions for keeping the person cold. And what I did with my mother, what we did, I knew all this, so I kept her for a day and a half, I think. And then you can do everything you want. You can prepare this person. You can be saying prayers. You can have incense. All of this we were able to do with my mother. And her death is a whole other story. Anyway, and I'm not laughing about it, but she was so ready, she became irritated in that final week. And she was calling people up and saying goodbye with me. And I'm saying, she said, I'm going to be embarrassed if I don't die. I said, well, I'm sure you're going to be alive in the morning. So that's why it's a little bit funny, because it was very her in a certain way. She's going to take charge and put her meds. Well, so it took a week, but she felt she was ready. She was tired. Her kidneys were failing. Her heart was failing. And she was in tune because she was convinced, totally in faith, she would be met by her group. And I sure hope it happened. Anyway, so going back to 3 days and then 49 days, 7 times 7 is the period of mourning. You might say that in a more conventional way, a period of, ideally stopping everything that you do in your, in this life we live. But of course, that's not always possible for people to actually take 49 days. We don't yet have, federal grief leave, although it's not a bad idea. So in that 49 days, the Tibetans, I think, it's not certain, that's the time of moving whatever it is that's still going, whatever that energy is moving through the barcos. And that's a kind of assessment time, but as I'm not a Tibetan practitioner there, but you can read about this, it's very accessible information. So 49 days, 7 times 7, 7 always being the number in Buddhism. I'm not exactly clear why, except that is true. And the Buddha, and I always get mixed up, maybe you can help me, between birth and his enlightenment of when he rose and took 7 steps in the 4 directions. So this is the number 7. And I'm sure there's lots of lore information, how this evolved over time, coming out of Indian practice. So that is, that's just the bare minimum in terms of custom. But I was asked to say to you, if you want a funeral here, and funerals are really well done here, if you want it, you need to tell someone. This is no light matter. Many of you are very young, and so it may not feel like it's anything urgent for you, but remember, we don't know. So if this is to think about this now, and for some of us, it's a given, and there's no question that's what will happen. But if you want this, then tell someone, preferably write it down, sign it, have somebody in your family and have this. We've had situations where somebody very important, who was no longer practicing, but very, very important in the development of this place, who died, and we had nothing. We had nothing. I vaguely knew how to reach his brother, and we did. But without family, we couldn't ourselves just decide. And of course, it was very, very important to us here that he have Buddhist funeral, which we did manage, but it took some doing. So tell people that are going to be the people to take care of you. Tell them, give them something in writing. And not just as an aside, take care of your financial affairs. Don't leave a mess. Please, don't leave a mess for your heirs. Because if you want karma, this is true. It's a given. If you don't have anything, maybe it's not a big deal. But if you have anything, worth anything in the material world, you take care of that business, believe me. So, back to this. So this is something, because we don't know we're going to die. Remember I said in the beginning, do you know you're going to die? Because we don't know we're going to die, we don't want to deal with it. We avoid it. I've had it on a list for 2 years now to check out the historic Masonic cemetery in terms of a plot. Some of us here might already have it. I'm afraid they're going to run out before I get up. Well, anyway, so that's on a long-term to-do list. Anyway, so back to it. So say what you want. Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? If so, where? Do you want to be embalmed? Think about that one. Pretty icky. Do you want to have yourself seen? Do you? So these are all things, and you may not have them down in detail, but they are important to take care of, especially if you want it done here. You want Buddha-san to do your funeral, and it's done very well here. The other side of the little piece of that is, for the family, it's a great relief because we'll do it all. They don't have to do it all. They don't have to figure it all out. People might want to have a celebration of some sort of life or something separate, or a party or a gathering of food. But the ritual can be very well done here. So I just want you to think about that and to have your instructions clear, because family may not know. If you've just been coming here on your own over the years, your family may not realize that this is what you want, or that this is very important to you. So I leave you with that encouragement. Now I probably, of course I didn't look at these notes one time. I don't know if I covered everything or not, because I just can't read. I just can't look at the notes and talk at the same time. So I just want to see if there's anything I haven't covered. And I am going to read these poems.
Okay.
Oh, no, I have no, we're actually going to finish with Dogen. So, I'm going to move on. I don't know. I think the time's okay. I'm going to now read you the poems, and maybe they're better at the end, because these two poets express two really different attitudes about death. Not their death, the death of a parent. So some of you may know this if you've done any kind of literature, English literature. The great Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. I'm sure some people know this poem. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late, they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Brave men near death, who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now, with your fierce tears I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Dylan Thomas. So this is, of course, for his father. And this one is for my mother. When does the soul leave the body? Since early morning you have not moved, and only your head moves, thrown back with each deliberate breath, the one sound that matters in the room. My brother is here, my sister, two of your sisters, ripples widening from the bed. The nurses check and measure, keeping the many records. Are you dead? Are you afraid? Are you afraid? Are you dreaming of what is past, lost? Or is this the sleep? Or is this sleep some other preparation? My sister has put your rings on my finger. It seems like your hand stroking the white brow, unable to release you, not even after you have asked for death. And we know nothing about such pain, except that it has weaned you from us and from the reedy, rusted sunflowers outside the window, dropping over the snow like tongueless bells. This is written by Ellen Bryant Voigt. So I thought this was a contrast of a woman and a man, and I don't mean that to be that rigid. It could be the other way. But I like the juxtaposition. I was going to read Emily Dickinson. Death did not stop. Didn't stop for me, but I decided to leave Emily. Anyway, it's a great book. It's called Staying Alive, and I really can't explain it. It's just a lot of different poets grouped in different ways, past, present. So somebody told me that. And now we'll close with Dogen, our great teacher. And I am by no means steeped in Dogen, although you can't have been here as long as I have and not had teachings and classes. So this is just called Birth and Death. And I don't think that it's very, very challenging to say, oh, I get Dogen. I don't think so. But however, I would encourage you to drop out if you can of your cognitive, I get it, figuring it out mind, and see if you can hear it with your whole self. Just take it in the way you might get a good symphony hall and Beethoven symphony and sitting in the upper balcony where you get the vibrations. So maybe try hearing it that way. I can't read it in that any bombastic way. So, birth and death. As a Buddha, I have to always get my glasses just right so I can see. As a Buddha and birth is, as a Buddha, I'm going to start over. As a Buddha is in birth and death, there is no birth and death. It is also said, as a Buddha is not in birth and death, a Buddha is not deluded by birth and death. These statements are the essence of the words of two great Zen masters, Kinping and Ding Shan. Never neglect them, as they are the words of those who attain the way. Those who want to become free from birth and death should understand the meaning of these words. If you search for a Buddha outside of birth and death, it will be like trying to go to the southern country of you with your spear heading towards the north, or like trying to see the Big Dipper while you're facing south. You will cause yourself to remain all the more in birth and death and miss the way of emancipation. Just understand that birth and death is itself nirvana. There is nothing such as birth and death to be avoided. There is nothing such as nirvana to be sought. Only when you realize this are you free from birth and death. It is a mistake to suppose that birth turns into death. Birth is a phase that is an entire period in itself and with its own past and future. For this reason, in Buddha Dharma, birth is understood as beyond birth. Death is a phase that is an entire period in itself, with its own past and future. For this reason, death is understood as beyond death. In birth, there is nothing but birth, and in death, there is nothing but death. Accordingly, when birth comes, face and actualize birth. And when death comes, face and actualize death. Do not avoid them or desire them. This birth and death is the life of a Buddha. If you try to exclude it, you will lose the life of a Buddha. If you cling to it, trying to remain in it, you will also lose the life of a Buddha. And what remains will be the mere form of a Buddha. Only when you don't avoid birth and death or long for it do you enter a Buddhist mind. However, do not analyze or speak about it. Just set aside your body and mind. Forget about them and throw them into the house of the Buddha. Then all is done by the Buddha. When you follow this, you are free from birth and death and become a Buddha without effort or scheme. Who then remains in the mind? There's a simple way to become a Buddha when you refrain from unwholesome actions and are not attached to birth and death and are compassionate towards all sentient beings, respectful of seniors and kind to juniors, and not excluding or desiring anything. With no thoughts or worries, you will be called a Buddha. Seek nothing else. So in all due respect to the master. So I think there's time. I'm not sure what time I'm supposed to stop. But I think there's time.
11:40 is usually.
Okay, all right. So we have a little time. If people have comments, something they want to share, I don't know if I can answer any questions, if I will be able to answer your questions, but, I would try. So, any thoughts, or just how did you answer those questions, although that's not a compulsion to share. Tencon, I can see your hand back there.
I'm 85, and so I think about death
Yes,
a lot.
me too.
And I actually died.
Yes,
I was, believe it or not, I
right.
had a rank in
Do you want to say to the group how that was, or do? I mean, I know the story. But do you want to say to the group how you died?
Yeah, I was in the Navy journalist. They actually had a rate, and it was JO3, and I was covering the story of jungle survival, and I fell into a warm pool.
You fell into a warm pool.
A cold pool. If I fell in a warm one, I would have died. And they pulled me out, and I was dead in 5 to 8 minutes.
Right.
And what I did was I thought about it. I said, there was nothing.
Right.
There was no voice of heavenly angels. And I had a series of grand mal seizures and got me out of the service. And, but anyway, I learned a lot.
You learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
It was absolute silence.
Let's just keep.
I've had two similar experiences, although probably not dead for 5 to 8 minutes, but because I'm a 15-year survivor of severe brain disease, I found myself twice in the ICU.
Well, did I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure Tencon was finished.
And I apologize if I interrupted.
No, you didn't.
I have a tendency to do
No.
No, it's just part of the. Can I
Right,
bring that up into these?
we just wanted to make sure Tencon is finished. We have plenty of time
for sure.
Yeah.
for you to share yours. So Tencon,
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
well, I just wanted to
No,
ask, well,
absolutely,
Please.
I appreciate that.
Mariah, please, just a moment. I just wanted to ask Tencon, how are you feeling now? Are you willing to share that with us?
Well, I don't know if this has.
I know it's hard to see you.
Fallen and I can't get up.
What?
Fallen and I can't get up. That happened to me, but I took care of myself. I was an athlete. Well,
You were in an ambulance recently.
An athlete.
Athletes.
And I went to the gym 3 days a week.
Right.
I had my shoulder and from swimming. And I had an operation. And I said no to fentanyl. That's so. This is unrelated.
What? I'm sorry.
The falling down. I can't get up.
Yeah.
It's unrelated.
Okay.
My previous, I had one seizure 43 years later.
Right, I remember that. I remember when that happened. Well, if you ever want to get together and talk, we're the elders here.
Yeah.
So that, just know that that's open totally to you.
I noticed that a lot of people die. I see a lot of people die in the 90s.
All right, well, thank
Good
you.
friend just
What-
passed
what-
away, he
Evelyn?
was 99. And, yeah, the oldest friend that, the couple, she is still living, she's 92. And he just died last week.
Oh, yes, your friends at the post, yes. Oh, yeah, well. So, thank you, Tencon, for sharing, and, it's an invitation. So, so Mariah, you were sharing something with us? No,
Indeed, I was just responding to your experience of when you were pronounced dead, and I think you were dead, but when you died, you experienced nothing. I didn't die, but basically my illness has almost killed me twice. So I wound up in the ICU, and my experience both times, basically I took way too much of that medicine that the psychiatrist had prescribed for me, twice, 2 different medicines. Yeah, just to get some relief from the pain.
right.
But my experience is that it was just black. At some point, things just went black, like a black curtain dropping. Not in a bad way, just black. But and then when they revived me or whatever, and I woke up, I remember the blackness was just relief. And for me, it was the end of the suffering. And in the 15 years that I've been a survivor, I can't tell you how much time I've spent just praying for that relief. Yeah, give me the black. So I don't actually fear death anymore. I am doing better though in general. So but I so appreciate your guidance to us about what to put in place. And we know anything can happen to anybody, anytime, age
Yes.
aside.
Yes.
I see the speed of these moving vehicles on the street now, no helmets, and I just think, poof. Anyway, that's a digression. Anyway, I appreciate
Right.
your guidance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mariah, for sharing. Those are hard things to share. Thank you, Evelyn.
I just want to say one more thing. Alice, our friend whose husband just died at 99, she spent her career as a nurse in intensive care. And she said to me several times, she had seen many, many people die. She said she has never, ever seen anyone fearful at the moment of their death.
Right.
Which is amazing. She said, I don't know if there's some hormone that comes over you or what it is. She said, but I've never seen anyone fearful of dying in the intensive care unit.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for
Yeah.
sharing that. And
The best way to make your feelings known and make your desires known is to fill out an advance directive. This tells everybody what you want, who you want notified,
Right.
what you don't want.
right, and that's
these are-
also something I didn't mention. So thanks for
These are available online, they're available
Right.
at the hospital, they're available in your doctor's office.
right. So you know what she's talking about. She's talking about what you want done in your own dying process. So thanks for bringing that up. And then somebody back here.
I just wanted to share a remarkable experience. My dearest friend passed away about 14 years ago. Her name is Kathy.
Could you speak a little so everybody can hear?
Yeah.
I get
So-
frustrated on Sundays because I can't hear the questions.
My dearest friend Kathy passed away about 14 years ago, and she was a kind, warm, generous person. She loved to host parties. She always said she had the gift of hospitality, and she did. She was on hospice for maybe 4 months, last 4 months of her life, and the last 4 days, she took a sharp decline, and it was clear her death was imminent. And by Sunday evening, it was clear she was going to pass that evening. And her mother was there, her sister was there, her pastor was there, dear family friend, and I was there. And it was January 4th. And we're all just sitting around waiting for her to pass and watching her breath. And it was kind of grim. And finally the family friend asked, can I get anything for anybody? Get some coffee or tea? And I don't know what came over me, but it was January 4th. We had gotten some champagne for New Year's, and we never opened it. I said, you know what? Why don't we open the champagne and make this a bon voyage party? And we did. And we poured a glass of champagne for everyone, including Kathy, who of course was responsive. And we were just toasting and wishing her bon voyage. And sure enough, she passed. And it was just the most amazing experience. And she had been kind of gray and white and non-responsive. And that's how she passed. And we got up to, call people and make arrangements. And the hospice nurse came about an hour after she passed and walked in and just was taken aback. And I was like, what? And the hospice nurse was, I have never seen that. What? She looked at Kathy, and somehow in the hour that we were making arrangements, Kathy straightened up her head and smiled. Kathy straightened up her head and smiled. And she died of, well, she was beyond death. But she, and the hospice nurse had never seen that. And
No, it was that champagne, no doubt.
So, but just turning that into a bon voyage and go beyond, and we wish you well.
Well, there is the notion that people need permission to go. That's why I'm leaving the room. There is that notion of saying to the person, it's all right. We'll be all right. I mean, I just, so that maybe she felt that. Who knows? But it's a beautiful story, and thank you. And I think Linda had her hand up here.
I did. I wanted to add to the comment about the advanced directive. There's an addendum now available to the advanced directive that addresses dementia, which is, in my experience, talking with people around their concerns about aging and death, is their biggest fear.
Right, that's
that they're going to, their brain is going to
right.
leave the building before their body does.
Right.
And so if you're going to do the advanced directive, or loved one is going to do it, dig a little deeper and find the addendum that addresses dementia, so that you can really have that conversation. And the other thing that I suggest to people when we're talking about this is that they don't just make they have a conversation with the people that they're hoping to take care of them.
Right.
Their
Well,
final
exactly.
Right,
You
and
tell
if they're on
someone,
the same
yes.
page.
Yeah.
They're on the same page, because if you go into the hospital, it doesn't matter what you want. If your next of kin says do everything,
Right.
the hospital, you're gonna be dead. The hospital's you're not gonna sue the hospital, but the next of kin might.
Right.
So
Right.
they're
Well,
gonna pay
thanks for
attention to
bringing.
your next of
Right.
kin.
I think that's really important, and so thanks for
Yeah.
bringing that up, reminding us. I think it's probably. Oh yes. Okay.
If you don't mind, sort of related, but my children have been asking me about like how I want to be treated after death, and like, do you want to be a tree? Do you want to be composted? Because they're kind of against more traditional methods, and I'm like, well, if I can't be on a funeral pyre like a Jedi, I don't care. But so then, like realizing I need to be more serious about this for their sake, if no one else's, right?
Right.
Is that, in your opinion, what would you consider the important things to consider about how your body is treated after the spirit is left? Right? Like, is it important how your body is treated?
Well, I think so, and I think that's a good question for Hojo-san. But as I understand it, of course, it's going to be treated with great respect and care. And as I recall, the first death we had here, the person was taken to the funeral home, and well, if it's us and we've had a raksu, we would have a white raksu that's made for you. And so we, you remember, Thelma, we had, whose chair I sit in? It's his chair. But what was his Buddha name? Was it Chosen? No. Kozen. You know what I'm talking about. Well, anyway, we're a little sketchy on his Buddha name. But that was our first death. So he was at the funeral home with white in his white rock suit, and we all came, and Ajo and his assistant, who then was Gensei, did prayers and ceremony, and we all could go up and place flowers or beads or anything with him, and that was what we did. And he was not embalmed, and the funeral home was very willing to have this makeover for us to do this ceremony. Now, I believe there was this funeral here. So I think ideally there's a ceremony with the body, and that's separate then from the formal funeral that will happen here. But the body is treated with respect, and in several cases, we have accompanied the body and done ceremony at the door of the crematorium. But that's a certain person.
Mhm.
Or I've done that with a friend who asked to come and be with her mother. So I think that mainly it's respect and care. That, and I don't know the particulars, but I think that's a good question, and we can find out more. And I thought we would close, is that?
Mhm.
So with a little story. I don't even know how I know this story, but it is apropos. So a famous person, we don't need to name them, long, long ago in her life, I think she was around 29, was having a great love affair with, probably the love of her life, certainly at that point. They were in the same business together. And he suddenly was diagnosed with rapid, fast-growing lung cancer. There really wasn't anything. I think it took about 10 months. And the doctor came out, obviously, the hospital, and said, he's gone. She went kind of crazy, rushed in the room, and started pounding him and demanding that he not die. Now, this was witness, he opened his eyes briefly and said, now he was already pronounced dead, said, it's all right, it's okay. And died. So I just leave you with that. What is it? Thank you all so very much.